What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Goblin Time Reviews, where today we're reviewing the band Cynic and their album Focus, which came out in 1993. So, I guess I'll start out with a little background of what I know about this. So, this is the guys from the early Death lineup, Paul Masvidal and Sean Reinert. After the Human album, those guys, Human came out in 1991, and after that album came out, and I guess they did some touring, they split off from the band Death and went on to form this band. So the funny thing about it, though, is they don't really sound very much alike at all. There are some, I will say that Paul's vocals do sound a little bit like, especially during the death metal sections of the record, they do sound a lot similar to what you would find from that era in death metal. But this is a very different project than what was going on at the time with Chuck's band Death. So I picked this album for this week because to me this is like a very interesting listen for that time period. Talking about early 90s death metal, and if you go back in time and you listen to a lot of those older records, you'd be pretty hard pressed to find something that sounds like this, because it's very jazzy and it's very spacey, can be atmospheric at times, very science fiction-esque, and I love this record. But Steele, do you want to give some of your initial impressions and thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, so going in, I was excited. I like Death. Sound of Perseverance, I really like that album. I've gotten through a decent number of tracks on, like, Symbolic. So going in, I think I was expecting something along the lines of that, at least as far as, like, that progressive, like, the technicality at least.
Right.
And that was there, and I guess I was surprised how much it didn't sound like Death.
Yeah.
And how it was its own thing. Was this the one, did you say that he played the drum tracks based on...
Well, I think Sean Reiner, the drums on this project were basically inspired by jazz artists.
Okay.
So if you listen to the record, and I'm not talking about like smooth jazz.
Right.
I'm talking about the more upbeat, up-tempo jazz.
Yeah. Like the Jazz Cats.
Yeah, or like Miles Davis.
Yeah.
Something like that. If you listen to this record again, you'll find that the drums can be really difficult to follow.
Yeah.
Not because they're necessarily so complicated, because they are complicated at certain points, but there's also a lot of layers of other stuff happening in the music that sometimes the drums and the bass can get buried, especially when you're talking about that heavy vocoder that comes in with the vocals and the synthesizer. Those can tend to kind of dominate, but if you really listen closely, if you have a good pair of headphones, you'll be like, man, Sean is killing it on those drums. He's just like so busy, and he's all over the place. It's just fill after another fill.
Yeah.
And it's insane, but...
Yeah, I was noticing, I noticed the drums and the complexity, and I felt like that's almost, for me, what was driving most of the whole album. And I mean, maybe I was biased, because I thought you said that he, like, recorded the drums over some tracks, like listening to jazz tracks. He like recorded like his own death metal drums.
I think that's what he was jamming at the time.
Yeah, and then
I think that's what he was into.
Yeah,
it's like a Ackerfeld and prog, like from Opeth. Like according to him, he stopped listening to death metal around the late 90s. Altogether, and started listening to just prog rock.
Yeah.
And you saw that come out later in like the 2010s when Opeth got rid of the death metal thing and started just doing prog rock. So I think it comes down to like what an artist is listening to at the time, what's really inspiring to them. And I think these guys just probably thought like, hey man, let's like throw a wrench into this death metal thing.
Yeah.
Because at the time, you got to understand, like, well, you saw that documentary. We watched the Extreme Metal Evolution documentary together. You saw how popular death metal was at that time, and how it was brand new. It was like it's like the hot new chick in school, right?
Yeah,
Everybody wanted a piece, and it was like record labels were just snatching up death metal bands left and right, and everybody was like playing this new style, but there wasn't as much heterogeneity. There wasn't as much variation in the music style yet, because it was so new. So these guys were one of the first, in my opinion, one of the first bands to take death metal, like that basic idea, and kind of morph it or transmute it into something totally different. You know, so
yeah. Well, and I liked the complexity of it. I liked the ambiances that they were able to create. Cause like with the whole sci-fi theme, I could gather that it felt like that.
Yeah.
It also felt very like 80s. I know it came out in 93, but like the synths and stuff.
Yeah.
They're so reminiscent of like, I mean, just media that I've consumed throughout my life that would include any sort of jazzy synths or like ambiance, just like what's created in this album. And it's weird to hear that paired next to the death metal. I like it. I don't think it doesn't like, I'm not like, this sucks. You can't have death metal music and then follow it with a spacey jazz section. That's garbage. Like it doesn't sound bad. I enjoy it.
No, doesn't it sound like counterintuitive off the top of your head? Like
it does.
You sound like so. You guys are gonna alternate like clean jazz sections with like tech death. You guys are gonna do that, right? Like today, I'm sure there are bands that do that all the time, but back in '93, nobody was doing that, and that's why not now Cynic fans, you might have to correct me on this one. But I could have swore I read online that Cynic, after this album was released, went on tour with Cannibal Corpse and tried to play this shit on stage in front of like big crowds and got pelted with like beer bottles and beer cans and stuff. So,
I mean, they probably weren't expecting to hear melody.
Yeah, they're like, just bash our faces in, like per the usual, right? But yeah, I like pretty much every song on this album. I'm not gonna go through every song, but I do want to talk about a couple of them. Celestial Voyage, I think, has the coolest riff on the whole album. The riff that opens that song up is really cool. The bass is really audible in the mix, and it was like that on several of those songs, especially the earlier songs. You could really hear the bass, and I think his name was Sean Malone. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, he was like, that bass work was just crazy. And at some points it sounded like fretless bass. But it may not have been. I'm not sure. It's just, you know how like a fretless bass has that really like weird kind of whoa sound. It's not like a typical bass sound. It's a little bit like elongated and kind of like stretchy.
Yeah,
it's kind of weird. But I thought I could have swore I heard that on some of these songs. But yeah, I think the drums were again very busy. Couldn't really tell what was going on there. But yeah, another thing is the guitar solos and guitar flourishes always seem to come in at these odd times, and you never really knew when to expect them. And there's so much happening in the music that all of a sudden it just pop in, and you're like, oh, there's a solo. That's a pretty cool feeling for me. Because it kind of keeps me on my toes when I'm listening to it. You know, even though I've heard it a million times, I really like how they played around with the song structures on these, on this one.
Yeah. So, I wish I would have gotten to listen to it with like headphones, better quality headphones, more, because I just listen to it whenever I can, in the cars, like prime time, or even at work. And we sat down and listened to it together, but it was on my TV. So I don't really get a chance to listen to these albums with good headphones. And I listened to this one a little bit, and I tried to just skim through the songs so that I could at least get like a little bit of the good sound from each song. And like I was noticing that I could hear the guitar parts a lot better than I was able to before. And I wasn't able to fully like absorb it, but it was it was nice. It all sounded really good.
Yeah.
To hear like through all the layers and the nice headphones. I mean, there's a lot of alternate picking guitar riffs. I feel like that I remember that just go along with the drums being like.
Yeah.
And the guitar's just chuggy.
Yeah. It's the more you listen to it, man, the more you'll realize how technical it really is.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole thing. I think that back then you had bands like Death who were headed in that direction of being more progressive and more technical. Mm-hmm. And then you had Cynic, which was very progressive and technical, and then Atheist. Even though Atheist was considered an early tech death band, like the first ever tech death band, if you listen to their material, their stuff sounds a little bit thrashier, like a little bit more like stuck in the 80s a little bit. Okay. So, but there just weren't that many artists back in those days that were attempting stuff like this, and that's kind of like, to me, what makes it cool is that, you know, if I want to listen to 90s death metal, I could listen to Entombed or Obituary or Carcass or any of these bands, but what's going to distinguish them and make them stick out? You know, what's going to make them different from the others? Right. You know, so that's kind of what I pulled from this, is just that, like, yeah, it's technical, but it's not the only drawback. The reason why a lot of metalheads, like death metal fans, the ones that don't like this record, they don't like it because it's not like brutal per se. It's not like
I was gonna say
heavy.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was about to chime in and say like, yeah, there's not like I don't like whenever I'm listening to it, I don't like, I'm not like, I don't want to headbang. Like I'm like, I mean, I can groove a little bit. Like it's catchy. Like it gets catchy at times, and the melodies are nice, but it's not hard or brutal or, and even though it's death metal, which is, I guess, interesting.
Kind of weird, yeah.
But it's almost like almost rock vibes. Just, you know,
there's a lot of clean guitar on the album. So.
Yeah, the moments where like you are moving to the music, it's like, I don't know, you're dancing almost. You're like, yeah.
But that's what makes bands like Death so special, is because like Death was able to, and I know this is a Cynic review, but real quickly, Death, you know, Chuck Schuldiner, he was able to write music that was incredibly brutal, but also technical. Yeah. So there are aspects of the music that you just marvel at the technicality, and then the other parts you're like headbanging. Yeah. Right? So it's like a beautiful marriage between the two sensibilities. Mm-hmm. And for me in death metal, that's what you want. You want like a mixture between, a happy medium between brutal and like technical. There's got to be like somewhere in between there for me personally. Like, mm-hmm. If a band has both of those qualities, I'm probably going to really enjoy it.
Yeah, I feel like there were some moments like that on this record. Whenever he had the harsh vocals, some of those parts, like the verses and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, and so like I liked the vocal modulator. I feel like it did a good job of kind of bridging that gap between the harsher sounds into like the more spacey, atmospheric stuff. Mm-hmm. But I feel like they could have used it less. Or just, I don't know, in the context of use. And like I didn't listen to it with the headphones as much, so maybe I wouldn't have even complained about it if it was just a headphones experience. But like it drowned out like the other instruments and stuff.
Yeah, that would be, and that's why to me this isn't like a perfect record, because mm-hmm. like one of my criticisms would be that the drumming especially tends to get in some of the busier sections, the drumming tends to get drowned out by the vocals and the synths and the guitars. And I think that was just a product of 1993 production, man. I really don't think necessarily that it was the fault of the musicians, because I've heard like records that were a lot even more chaotic and busier than this that came out in the 2000s, and you can hear all the different instruments, you know, independently in the mix. It's really well produced stuff. And I think just back then, you know, I think the guy from Morrisound, I don't remember what his name was, but where the Morrisound is where all the death metal bands from Florida, where they all got their albums produced at, recorded and produced. But he was saying, yeah, it's hard to make stuff that's really rough sound clean, you know, and it's hard to make that double bass and that snare stick out in a mix that's packed full of other sounds, you know. And that would be my one criticism of it. Is I think that sometimes that the vocoder gets a little bit, I don't mind the sound, but it takes up so much sonic space in the mix that you when you're listening to it, you find yourself just focusing on that and just hearing that, and you're missing everything else.
Yeah, whenever I tried to look at the lyrics, there was like no chance of me absorbing the fact that there was like a song behind it.
Yeah.
Like all I heard was like, so I don't even remember any of the lyrics or what it was about. I mean, space. Not even space. Like I get that from the song titles. I don't remember any of the lyrics.
Yeah. I haven't read the lyrics, but I've read that they're about like meditation and astral travel and kind of weird out there stuff. But funny enough, one of the songs I love on this album, probably one of my favorites, is Textures. And Textures doesn't have any vocals.
Yeah.
It's a pure instrumental. And the metal, it's got a little sparse bits of metal in it, but really it's like a jazz instrumental. And that's like my favorite song on this album. I think they do a really good job of, especially with counterpoint. So they'll have like multiple guitars, and each guitar is playing something different. But the melodies that are being played, they all come together and create like this third melody that's like, or this third marriage of sounds. And it sounds beautiful, and it's like, that's got to be difficult to write stuff like that too. And I think about that. It reminded me of Steve Reich, the minimalist composer in classical music. He did a lot of stuff with guitar, and he has a suite called Electric Counterpoint that's all like different guitar tracks being laid down, and they're different melodies, but they create like a third melody all when the melodies are played simultaneously. And that's to me that stuff's pretty tough to pull off, and it's weird to find it on a death metal album. But I love that song. Let's see, AAL, yeah. Did Animals as Leaders is pretty jazzy too, and they're pretty progressive.
Yeah.
I wonder if Tosin ever like listened to this album.
I believe
that may be kind of a
honestly,
reach.
Probably.
Because Tosin doesn't play death metal. But like, I wonder if anybody ever said, "Hey man, check this out. I wonder if you would like it. It's pretty jazzy. It's like jazzy metal."
Yeah, I mean, some of that atmosphere. I mean, they get atmosphere going in their stuff too. Maybe. I can't even remember how it goes, but I thought the beginning for How Could I sounded like boss battle music.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was for like something that you'd hear in like, not like an older video game, not like 8-bit, but something like the 90s.
Yeah, I wrote a lot of notes on that one too. That one was one of the few tracks to me that had some like proper death metal sections in it, where you're like, yeah, this is definitely death metal.
Yeah.
But let's see. I wrote down Spiral Architect. So I was always thinking about like, okay, who was inspired by this? Was anybody inspired by this? And I know I can think of a few that for sure had to have heard this. and been inspired by it. One is Obscura. You listen to anything by Obscura? They're technical death metal all the way, sci-fi all the way, like talking about like planets being pulled apart and fucking, you know, like supernovas exploding. And
I know, I've heard of them.
And yeah, they even use a vocoder in their songs.
Oh shit, right?
Yeah, there's a song called "Ethereal Skies" that's really good. I'll have to show you sometime.
Mm-hmm.
The guitar work is just insane, and the guy's doing that weird robot voice thing, and it sounds like a more modern version of what we just heard, you know.
Yeah.
And then and Obscura is really big in the death metal scene. And then we got another lesser known band, Spiral Architect. They do some of the similar stuff as that shows up on this record. It's like really experimental, avant-garde, like jazzy death metal, but with like a progressive singer.
Okay.
So it's pretty weird, but I could see them listening to this thing. I could see the Faceless. The Faceless Planetary Duality is like one of the best tech death records of the 2000s, and it's got they use a vocoder in that as well too. It's a couple of different points. So yeah, I was just thinking about that. I don't know. I always like to kind of chart the history of things and like figure out, okay, well this came from that and this came from that and blah blah blah. But maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe none of those guys ever listened to this album.
Maybe, who's to say?
I know Obscura did for sure. Obscura had to have. There's no way they didn't hear this.
Maybe.
Obscura fans, let me know on that. Do some research for me and come back and leave a comment. See if we get any comments on this video, but
yeah.
But yeah, do you have any more thoughts to say about it, or?
I wish I wanted to listen to it more. Obviously, I didn't want to listen to it more that much, though, because I didn't. No, I wish I listened to it more, but I wasn't in the mood for it. I think part of it was the lack of the brutalness. Made me neglectful to turn to it. And I don't know, trying to focus on all the different parts I wasn't ready for. I just don't think I quite had the patience for it, so I'd like to listen to it again whenever I'm more patient for it. But, overall, like, I enjoyed it enough to where, like, you know, I want to come back and appreciate it more for the things that I liked. I'd like to go back and appreciate and actually, like, really absorb.
The first time I heard this album was in like 2012, or no, it was 2013, and I said to myself, I'm like, oh, that just sounds like death. Like, what's the big deal?
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't listen to it for like 7 years.
Yeah.
And then I bought it one day at a Slackers in Jeff City and brought it home and listened to it a lot and really fell in love with it. So it didn't make a good first impression on me either, is what I'm saying. As I heard the voice and I heard the guitars, I was like, this is just basically like Death ripoff. What is this?
Yeah.
And I like stopped it. I just like turned it off immediately. I didn't even let it play. And then like 7 years later, I was like, dude, this shit is awesome, man. So yeah, maybe it just takes time, but I don't know.
I mean, with complex music, it's like, I don't know, it depends what you're looking for with your music listening experience. You know, it can be a lot of different things. It can be that catchy shit that you just hardly pay attention to, but you memorize immediately.
Yeah.
Or it can be something that you have to listen to a lot of times to really appreciate.
Yeah. Also, I think it depends on, like, where you are in your life, you know? Because some things may hit you differently at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's music that I used to love back when I was 16 that I'm like, what the fuck was I listening to? You know, I'm like, that's not a good song.
Yeah.
And then like something will happen, I'll hear something and then I'll think it's shitty, and then like down the line, years later, I'll listen to it again and be like, man, this is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of factors that play into it.
Yeah.
As far as like where your head is at.
Yeah.
What's going on in your life, who you are as a person, all that plays into it. So
yeah, what you've discovered.
Yeah, exactly. And the other listening experiences you've had in that time.
Yeah.
I
feel like right now I'm having a lot of things I heard that I was like, meh.
Yeah.
Because probably a lot because it was just too heavy, or whatever, or just like heavy in a way that I was like, okay, I want to listen to heavier stuff, but this is ridiculous. But like now that I'm like, that stuff that I would think is ridiculous, I'm like, oh, I like that because it's like different.
Yeah.
It's like putting a cool twist on it.
Yeah, I was thinking you're probably looking more for something that's gonna like melt your face off kind of thing, or just be like super extreme and head throttling, like. And there are albums I know that are in that realm that I could have picked, but I just picked this one because it was off the wall and different.
Yeah, I have the solo and symbolic in my head where it goes like da 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 da, and then it just goes like
yeah.
And that part's so yeah, that's kind of what I'm in the mood for.
Have you heard of Cryptopsy None So Vile?
Mm-mm.
Okay, dude. That's like my brother's favorite death metal album.
Okay.
We'll have to listen to that at some point in the future. Not right away, but some point down the line, we'll have to do that one.
Yeah?
Because that one's pretty freaking extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was like that's like the Archspire stuff.
Yeah.
It's in that realm, except it came out in 96.
Okay.
So it was like way ahead of its time.
Okay.
It was like it makes Sound of Perseverance sound like Taylor Swift, basically.
Okay.
And I love Sound of Perseverance, okay?
Oh yeah.
I'm not dogging that record out at all, but anyway, so yeah, I think we're done, guys. I like the album. Brandon likes it okay. But yeah, we'll see you in the next video. Let us know, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what albums you'd like to see us review here on the channel. Hope you guys are having a good night, and I'll see you later.
Yeah,
Bye.
yeah. Bye.